lead? Or?
Since Jim put the agenda together, we could just let Jim kick off.
Sounds good. Jim, we are recording. Go for it.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. And I think what we wanted to do today, and this is in the agenda docs, is really talk about, I guess we haven't had a meeting for a while. So one of the discussion threads that a few of us were having, Adrian, Faye, Tasha, and I, as well as Ryan, is in terms of where we are with all of the projects and what we would want to do, continuing forward in terms of the future of the projects, as well as for the multi-tenancy working group itself, right? So some options to consider are, if we feel that there's enough work done and enough continuation with projects like HNC, virtual cluster, with CAPI nested, and we can talk a little bit about the benchmarks projects and see if there's anything left to be done there. But if these are in a good place, maybe we advertise their I guess the graduation or the next steps on these projects, talk a little bit about the milestones, but then the question is, do we need to also continue as a working group, or what do we do to kind of bring some closure to the work done here and set up next steps? So that was the main topic for discussion, and certainly open to inputs and thoughts from everyone on that.
Do you want to maybe do like a round, like you pick on people to answer and do a roundtable?
Yeah, we could do that. And also, yeah, I'm not sure if everyone's up to speed on just the project status. So maybe as we're doing that, we can just give a quick update on work being done and where we are with the major projects.
Sure. Well, I'm first on the list, so why don't I go? So HNC, since we last met, we've released 0.9 from the new repo. So we finished moving to the new repo. A bunch of nice changes that went in thanks to Ryan and a bunch of other contributors. And I've got a little bit of a backlog of things that I need to finish reviewing, but I think there's not much. I was kind of ready to just call it 1.0. And I think we may just do that. We may just declare it to be 1.0, but we have basically fully transitioned, as I said, to our own repo. Technically, we report to SIGAUTH, although I have not yet attended a SIGAUTH meeting. But yeah, as far as the overall question goes, yeah, the fact that we haven't had an agenda at this meeting for a while, the fact that basically we haven't seen any new project proposals in a while. We've got HNC that's basically gone to SIGAUTH because its primary reason really is as a way to organize your policies, and that's really more covered by SIGAUTH. We've got virtual cluster and CAPI, and that really has sort of landed well in the SIG multi-cluster way. And I saw that we have a visitor from SIG multi-cluster today. And I think benchmarks is the one thing that Jim, you've said that we should decide where that's going. I think that would probably fit well under SIGAUTH as well, if they were interested in taking it. And I think that what remains after that is basically sort of like disseminating best practices. That's kind of what's left. And I think that should go either in, that would fit either well in docs or usability. I don't really know what the dividing line is, but I'm sure Tasha will have opinions on that. So yeah, I think that I'm leaning towards declaring victory and saying like these two projects that have come out of the working group have graduated, three projects, like two software projects, one benchmarking project, say like this is it, like this is at least until we get a new set of sort of important use cases to solve. I think that we can basically declare victory. That's my feeling, but that's just my feeling. And so I'll leave the floor open to everybody else then.
So Adrian, do you guys have a meeting? I mean, regular meeting for HNC?
No, we haven't had any. We haven't had any regular meetings. Basically, sort of Ryan and I chat when we need to fix something, when we need to decide on something. And we don't have, like, we've got a couple of users, but we haven't they haven't like demanded regular meetings, and we haven't made any. So I think that for HNC, we would probably just roll it more formally under SIGAUTH and do occasional updates.
Okay.
It's not a fast-changing project. Like the whole point of the project was that it should be pretty stable, and I think once we hit 1.0, we'll then leave it to future group users to really set the agenda of where we want it to go. But I think that for the time being, it really has stabilized, which is kind of nice. And I'm watching the number of weekly downloads is actually quite high of the client. So people are using it. I'd imagine it's from our two largest users, which are Mercari and I believe Workday. But it seems to be meeting their needs kind of as is, which is neat. And we'll see where we take it for beyond 1.0 after that. There have been a lot of requests for a couple of features, but not a lot of people who are willing to actually implement them. And I've got enough other things going on that I haven't been able to implement them myself at work. But certainly when people come in with these kinds of requests, we'll be able to work with them to get them in once they come in.
Yeah, sure. I'm asking because I'm just wondering if you want to have another kind of public channel, give a chance some users can directly face in the maintainer. So that's another meaning. I think we have this multi-tenancy working group, in the sense if people really care about this, they want to talk with the leader directly, there is a channel here. But in KPN, it's slightly different. We hold weekly meetings, so definitely this is not a big problem for us. I'm just curious. For KPN perspective, I think we have been moving to a SIG multi-cluster, and we in the past few months we are keeping evolving on the refining the leveraging the class API model for the tenant control plane. So that's the way that we were doing. And coming to the next in project wise, so we are thinking about more thorough end-to-end solution in terms of how to integrate with some sandbox container like Kata. So what is the thing that we should do? That's the planning that's coming in my mind. From a working group perspective, I think I have the same opinion with Adrian, but we need to talk benchmarking. I also feel SIGAUTH would be a good place for benchmarking. Just one more thing is the working group has been silent for a while, but I just got a news from there's a Charles. He was trying to propose something to the working group for the multi-tenancy solution. Well, I still think maybe it has been silent for a while, but now we have a request. So I don't know.
Yeah. So thanks for Fei to introduce. So yes, I was working on some other multi-tenancy solution that is different from the virtual cluster. Well, we are actually using a proxy server in front of the API server, and the proxy server will kind of like capture the request from the tenants and also process the response from the API server and give each tenant a view of they are the only user for the API server, things like that. And I was planning to give a presentation about this project maybe in 1 or 2 weeks, but I just noticed that I'm not sure, are we going to still continue this working group? So I wanted to see what you guys think. Because if we do not have this working group, I'm not sure where should I present this work. Yeah.
So
well, what do you think about the, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
I was gonna say, I'll chime in and I'll be the contrarian. So I guess from my perspective, I think, yeah, we definitely have victory. But if we look at the original charter of the working group, it was kind of to define the best practices of how to make a multi-tenant cluster. And we never actually did that, right? That's the one thing we haven't done. Because it's hard. It depends on what your cluster looks like. It's not one than other, but there's still a huge amount of, I guess, desire from the community for how do I make a multi-cluster or multi-tenant cluster. So I guess my proposal would be that maybe if we can find people that want, not necessarily this group has to stick around in the working group, but maybe the working group can, I guess, just change focus to documentation and like best practices around, if you wanted to make a multi-tenant cluster, here's some tools you can use, but then this is how you actually implement the tools in the best practice way. And we've never really dove into even kind of some of the lower level things that you need to care about from a multi-tenant a cluster, like even on the infrastructure side. So those are some areas that I think that we could definitely work on. But again, we also need volunteers to do that. And I think that's what we're lacking more than anything, because we're all very busy. And especially now that we've all signed up for all these other projects now. So that's, I guess that's my take.
Okay.
Tasha,
Yeah, I
any
mean,
thoughts from you on?
I think that if we have opportunity for new projects, both from what Ryan was describing and what Chow wants to present, my perspective has been, I'm not surprised that the meetings have been quiet lately. I think everyone's very burned out from COVID, and just kind of working all day, every day. Like, I think, just like kind of, we tend to not have a lot of meetings in the later part of the year just because people kind of want to coast into the vacation period. I had been wondering, just with the maturity of the three main projects, if we were getting to a point where it was time to spin stuff down. But I would say that if we have some ideas for other stuff we could do, we should make a project plan around it, see if people want to lead it. And if there is interest, then we could kick those off. And if there isn't, then we could be like, working groups are supposed to be temporary, right? Like, and so we could spin it down. So that would be my perspective, is if we see additional things we could pick up, we can kind of define what those are and see if people want to work on them. And if we see traction on that, then we could keep going. And if we don't see traction, then we could spin down.
Time depending, I'd be interested in working with Ryan on like that, basically that last set of documentation, right? Because we've done it in pieces, right? We've done the occasional blog post, and there have like Faye's written stuff on virtual clusters. I've written stuff on HNC. We've done it in pieces. And so I think maybe bringing it all together in a place that's not a blog, like that goes into the Kubernetes, like the official docs. Like, I mean, I could write something on a Medium post too, but I don't think that would really make us feel like we accomplish it. So who would we want to, there is a SIGs docs, right? I've never worked with them, but is that correct?
There is, but I think that they're more about automating the delivery of docs than delivering the docs. So it would really be on us to like make the pull request. It's the same as everything else. It's like a GitHub pull request to like add a docs page.
Oh yeah, no, sorry. I didn't intend to mean that they would write it for us. I certainly wasn't expecting that. I was expecting like, whose permission do we need to go and like add a new set of docs into the, like, I'm happy to help write the content. I just want to know, do we need to coordinate with someone, or can we just like start making a pull request and say this is on behalf of the multi-tenancy group?
And I'm not sure if they would allow us in general if we're pushing a third-party tool. Usually the Kubernetes docs are very strict on not, technically we're third-party, right? We're a SIG, we're not a core Kubernetes. So I don't know if we can make it into full docs. But we could look into like Kind is a sub project, right? And so they just use GitHub pages with their own UI, and that could be, we could have a multi-tenant Kubernetes official page, and that's where we put all of our docs. I don't know. I mean, maybe Tasha, you probably know better than I if we could get into the official docs.
I think we have a shot. When we started this, I gathered examples of how other CNCF projects had documented multi-tenancy. And a lot of it was, here's alpha, here's beta, here's projects you can use in their official docs. And so I always thought that was something that we should emulate. A lot of those pages have now been deprecated. So, but I do have some like links like Istio and a couple other projects where they just had much better multi-tenancy documentation than the Kubernetes project did.
Tasha, can you share the link? I want to look as well.
Yeah, so Kubernetes, sorry, go ahead, Tasha.
Oh no, I'll grab the links. Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that Kubernetes docs does have like concepts, they talk about other things like pod security is a great example, right? Which started out as an implementation, moved up into a conceptual thing, and then now there's various implementations that can fulfill that concept, right? So I think we can take a similar approach. There have been contributions, like one thing we're doing from the policy working group is we're creating a paper on Kubernetes policy management, which will go into the Kubernetes GitHub repo, at least. It's not going to be part of the official docs, but it will be an official paper published by the working group and maintained by CNCF, right? So I think there is opportunity to contribute, and I feel that there's still, especially for folks coming into Kubernetes, there's still a lot of questions on how to do multi-tenancy, right? And what the models are. Maybe most of us here perhaps take a lot of this for granted at this point, but certainly there's a lot of interest and questions around the topic. So having a set of guidance and guidelines to say what the different tenancy models are, how you would, go about implementing them and testing for them, certainly would be very helpful. And it should be possible to point to project pages from there, as long as they're projects and not third-party or vendor tools, things like that. There are, I've seen guidelines from CNCF on how to put disclaimers and make that a self-service process. So if, for example, if folks from Loft or vCluster also want to list their projects and show how they implement the same concepts, right? So we could follow that similar approach as well for multi-tenancy.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the tasks page right now, and I'm seeing like administering with kubeadm, which I think is not a core component, or is it? Is it a core component?
It was, and then it moved out, I think. I don't think it is anymore. I think it's its own subproject.
Yeah. And there's a thing about using core DNS for service discovery. Like core DNS is definitely not part of core K8s.
Okay.
And so, I mean, I think that they using a KMS provider for data encryption. Like, I think that there's and then a couple of things about namespaces. Share a cluster with namespaces. I wonder who wrote that. I think that's probably a pretty old tutorial at this point, or task. But yeah, I think that there is, I think putting this under the tasks, we might be able to get away with that. Oh, sorry, Tash is suggesting something. This used to be a docs page and is now a blog. Yeah, I'm not loving the idea that like permanent documentation goes into blogs.
All about marketing.
I guess. I mean, Tasha, do you think that that's how it should be, or just how it is?
Well, I always, from a usability perspective, I think that the Kubernetes docs leave a lot to be desired, from helping new or confused users about just how to navigate Kubernetes in general. I think that they're good at like the first touch, kick the tires, Kubernetes the hard way kind of style. But like when it comes to actually like help me set this thing up for production, like they're not good, right? And so what we're discussing adding here is actually like a fairly advanced set of documentation for how do I achieve a secure multi-tenant setup of my Kubernetes cluster. And that is something that a good docs page should have, right? Yeah.
So is this something we should maybe discuss in the next SIG-Auth meeting or SIG security or one of those SIGs and sort of get a sponsor for this, or?
I don't know that so what I would suggest is that we just outline what we'd like to do and start circulating it.
Okay.
And then we can also invite people to participate. It's easier for people to know how to participate if you kind of have a jumping off point for them.
So does that mean we want to keep the working group around focusing on this, and then those who maybe don't have the time or don't have the desire to work on that can, focus on their sub projects? I mean, it's all optional or morphine.
Yeah, I would say that this is a good, like having this would be a good reason to keep this effort going, just to like focus on it and so for me, like as long as we have like scoped projects that still need sort of continual coordination, then we can keep the working group going. And then when we've run out, we're just kind of like, yeah, okay, spin it down. And I wouldn't be surprised if we spin it down in the next 6 to 12 months. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point it got spun back up. Like, as because it's like kind of like the waves of like interest in the topic and just ability to pay attention. I think there's so much going on right now that people just don't have a lot of extra bandwidth. The other thing I would say is that, especially for a project like this, it could be an opportunity for us to partner with the Linux Foundation with some interns potentially, if we had like some scoped work there. So that might be a way to get some kind of boots on the ground.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Another thing that we could, sorry, go ahead. Or was that feedback? Okay. So, I mean, if we do decide to stick around, we could discuss changing the cadence of the meetings too, to once a month. And, have and then even if we don't have an agenda, we can just get an update on the sub projects and I don't know.
Yeah, I've been thinking that we might want to do once a month too. So yeah.
Anything? I think we have an agreement. Is that correct? Like we want to focus on finding a place to write some good documentation, and that is basically before declaring success. Is that? Do we have consensus on that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, and in the meantime, if people do have additional approaches to multi-tenancy that they want to kind of bring to the working group, we're super happy to work with them as appropriate. It's just that we have identified an ongoing project that we'd like to resolve, so we're not going to spin down the working group right now.
Yeah, I think our model. So if we can leave the same model for new projects. If they want to get a sponsor or get a support from working group and it fits our scope, I think we can support them, right? I mean, going through the previous process of HNC and the virtual cluster is kind of we incubated from a working group, get feedback, get people's attention, and in the end they can choose to graduate to their either SIG repo or even their separate repo. I think it's also okay. I think we can do that. But on the other hand, people can directly open source some other GitHub directly. I mean, it's also okay. I personally feel this model works well in the sense that I can get expertise in this area, get a lot of feedbacks.
Okay, can I ask a question? Like, let's say that we create these docs and then the working group spins down. Who owns them thereafter? Is it SIG usability? Or is it somebody else?
I think technically SIG auth owns it because the multi-tenancy working group is sponsored by SIG auth. So I think technically they inherit it, but that'd be my guess.
Is that the right place for it? Like, I'm afraid I don't know much about what your SIG does from this perspective. Like, I mean, I can, or do you do anything in terms of like owning documentation, or is it all about like actually improving Kubernetes to make it more usable? Okay. Yeah. So that's the wrong place. So yeah, probably a combination of SIG auth or then SIG multi-cluster for the stuff that is.
Well, so SIG security did not exist, I think, when this working group was started, right? So, and there is one thing I was just thinking about is there is also a SIG security docs sub-team that might be good to loop into this, because their charter is to help with security related documentation, which I think this falls under.
Yeah, I was gonna think we were gonna have to reach out to SIG security anyway, just for some, looping them into our best practices to one, review them, and two, give us some suggestions.
Yeah, so yeah, I haven't attended SIG security or SIG security docs meetings, but I know that both of those, there are So for example, there was a threat model for admission controllers, which is being published under SIG security docs, which I'm partially involved with. So maybe that is a good forum, or at least, you know, a good place to have a discussion. Trying to pull up their meeting notes and where they're located at.
Home of the famous Ian Coldwater.
Right, the SIG security, I think Tabitha and Ian lead that.
Yeah, I don't know Tabitha, but I follow Ian on Twitter. They always have something interesting to say.
Yeah, I just found the SIG security docs meeting agenda, so that's posted that in chat. Yeah, I think one of the. Sorry, go ahead.
That might be a good place to own like the top level documentation, because like it's one thing to say like, oh, go to, you know, SIG multi-cluster to see all the details on how to run virtual clusters, but how are you going to land there in the first place? And I think that yeah, SIG security seems like a reasonable place for that top level one. To say like, yeah, go here if you want something that's more cluster-like, go here if you want something that's more namespace-like, and here's how you can decide between the two. Yeah, we can ask them if they would want to take this over once we write the initial content. Sorry, I'm just reviewing the notes that you pasted in. Tasha, did you catch all that? Or enough of that?
Yeah, I have a feeling the better home is probably going to end up being SIGAuth. And if there's any way that we can, I was going to say automate the generation of documentation from the code. Like, cause like, you're right. Like as soon as you publish it, it's out of date, right? Like, so that's just, I think probably just pushing people to the GitHub repo, like having something super high level in the docs is probably the best way to go.
I actually don't think it's gonna, like the kind of advice that I find myself giving over and over again, I actually don't think it goes out of date that much, right? It's like, because the big questions are, do you want one cluster or several? How do you use namespaces to divide things up? And then maybe the details might change, like, you know, to use kata containers or something else. But I don't think we need to cover that at the high level documentation.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I usually just point them to the blog post, right? And anytime I get a question, that seems to answer most of the, you know, at least initial questions for folks who are trying to understand what to do.
See, I guess the questions I'm answering are, yeah, how do you secure it at the OS level for the like kata containers and that kind of stuff? Because that's what you care about from like a production perspective. But, you know, we were also running on-prem, so we didn't have Bottle Rocket and other things. So, so yeah, I guess like to me that would be ideal, is if we're like, hey, this is how you can actually deploy from nothing to something, a multi-tenant Kubernetes cluster, you know, in, you know, and then we can have volunteers for different cloud vendors to say this is how you could do it specifically for GCP versus AWS, or the considerations or differences. But yeah, a lot of it is, I don't know, a lot of the Kubernetes things, I think to Tasha's point, is it's assumed that you are an expert in all the things, and then you deploy Kubernetes on top of it. And then you can get started, but going deep is very difficult. So doing like actual secure multi-tenancy at the lower levels with like Kata, or if you don't use Kata, or, you know, you're looking at some of the, I think it's Intel is working on secured workloads within Kubernetes. You know, you have to, I don't know, you have to dive deep. And so I don't know if we need to solve that problem, but it is not like, you know, using HNC can give you somewhere, but my concern is it gives people a false sense of security, right? Like they think that they're secure because they're using HNC, and like I don't even think our agency docs really dive into, all right, now that you have agency and you can do self-service namespaces, this is how you reduce your cluster roles so that your users don't actually have access to all the namespaces, right? Those sorts of things are implied and not explicit. So I guess I don't know what the right answer is. I just think that, you know, I think we need to make it, maybe it's just a decision of, hey, if you're reading these docs, we assume you're an expert in Kubernetes. And if you're a beginner, go read all these things first, right? Or this is like an expert or intermediate level, I guess, suggestion.
I think, yeah, I would want to aim for intermediate level. I don't think that this would be appropriate for total beginners. I'm worried about trying to boil the ocean too.
Right.
It's like,
yeah.
Like if we want to do a sort of Kelsey Hightower, you know, Kubernetes the hard way, from the ground up, you know, mix some sand to make your first computer chip. It's like there's a lot to know, and even like security best practices, like, you know, least privilege and stuff like that. I don't think we can teach all of that. I think that there's so much that you need to know that basically having an idea of what the high level patterns are and saying, like, you know, understand, like, we can't solve all of your problems, right? Like if your tenants are, if you have specialized problems, then, you know, you're going to need to go below the level of whatever we can give in sort of broad overviews, but we could at least highlight what are some of the main solutions, either like software products or patterns, and their limitations, and say, like, okay, so none of these things that we've done actually secure the OS level. So if you've got, so if you think that, like, you know, Docker, or I guess Runc or whatever, if that is not secure enough for you, then you can go check out these things, but you have to understand the trade-offs of them yourself.
Right. Yeah, and we did, you know, provide, and I just pasted the link. I was checking on what we put in the blog post. So we did cover, at least at a very high level, all of those items as a checklist to say, you know, you need to think of security no matter which multi-tenancy model you implement, even if it's a single tenant cluster. Really, all of this still applies, right?
Ironically, my mission was always to get rid of the word tenant completely, because I hate the word tenant. And so maybe this will be my one last chance where I can try to
rename the working group. Maybe we pull a phoenix and we dissolve and recreate.
I mean, what else would we be? The landlord working group? Because they're not popular either.
Yeah, I guess, like, tenant is a great umbrella term, but it describes no use case as well. Like, a tenant is always an application or a team or a person or like a SaaS consumer, or so, like, and that's the thing. It's like, I always want to say, like, okay, it's great, and I think it's a great idea to have, like, how to set up a multi-tenant cluster. And then question number one is, what do you mean by tenant? Because if you just think that it is, like, there's no answer for, you know, how do you set up a secure multi-tenant cluster? Everything depends on who your tenants are.
Right.
Shared cluster working group. Yeah, I mean, there's a time I would have said yes, and then, you know, virtual clusters came along and we're like, well, in a way, it's not shared clusters anymore. It's actually like a weird variant of multi-cluster. But yeah, shared cluster would work as well, but I feel like people look for the term multi-tenant. It's just, they then assume that it means something, and that assumption is very frequently wrong, or at least not aligned with anything else. That's my experience anyway.
Another thing, I guess, to bring up from a working group perspective is, in the past we had discussed, once we had a quorum of what multi-tenancy means in Kubernetes, to start pushing for core features to start implementing some of that as a potential. Kind of sounds like we've given up on that hope, since it's highly unlikely. I guess it's worthwhile to confirm if that's, you know, if that's something we still going to want to consider doing, or if we think, you know, these tools are better suited for the use cases that we're trying to solve.
I feel like the building blocks are there. Like, that's why we keep on looking, and it's always been like, the tools are there, just how do you arrange them into something useful?
Yeah, from the control plane perspective, though, there's still some gaps, that well, that virtual clusters kind of solved some of it, but
You mean data plane security?
correct, yeah.
My
So-
assumption, I've never actually tried to set this up myself, was that things like Bottle Rocket, Kata, gvisor are solutions to that. Is that not? Do you not agree with that? And then maybe Istio on the L7 networking side.
Well, yeah, so yeah, through third-party products, I guess, yeah, you can get to some resemblance of like a networking, but there's still, yeah. I mean, technically, I think, yeah. I can't think of any immediate gaps. I mean, well, there's the PVC problems a continued issue, but that's largely solved with dynamic PVCs now, but yeah, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, it's been weird because we've often thought that there should be something, but then when we actually try to list them.
So also the one that still, I guess, is the plague is CRDs, right? So that's the big one. It's a cluster level item that you either can use or you can't, and you can't have duplicates. But
yeah, we've looked into it so many times. Like I've looked into it, Jordan Liggett's looked into it. It's like, I think that like you'd have to fundamentally revamp the API in a breaking way, and the demand just isn't there given that things like VC exists.
Right.
Like, and so like if that's your problem, if the problem is that you have your different tenants need different views of the Kubernetes universe, or the Kubernetes, like the resource model, the KRM resource model, then get a different cluster. Like on the managed clouds, that's easy. And now thanks to virtual clusters on-prem, it's pretty easy as well. Or at least I say that having never tried it, but at least it should be, at least it's possible.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
And we have like multiple examples, I think Apple's probably being the most prominent of them, who are actually doing this.
Yeah, there was also that article from Salesforce, right, on how they kind of use one common control plane, but just segregated hosts, right, for different workloads. So just,
yeah, I was trying to point at the same thing. So I think Jim just looking at the AWS re:Invent, so the Hyperforce, kind of what Salesforce guys was building. So I was thinking, so I mean, our multi-tenancy problem is not. I'd rather say we are trying to resolve a path. I mean, a path problem, not exactly an infra problem. So, in the sense that there's no consensus, everybody has this path. There's no consensus. Everybody has their own opinion. So so that's the reason. Every time I want to talk about multi-tenancy, the first thing I want to define is the scope. So exactly like Andrew does, what is a tenant? I'm going to just talk about this tenant in my entire context. I'm not going to talk about anything else. So yeah, I guess my feeling is if we want to document something, we should probably highlight the point. the multi-tenancy, you're asking a path problem. You're not asking an infra problem.
Agreed. I'd be willing at an undefined point in time to give a first cut at this, because I am interested in helping to write the sort of canonical docs, at least for the next year or two. So
yeah, and I have some cycles to help as well.
Yeah,
cool.
I'm also happy to read the document because it's annoying. You keep repeating this.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, how about I set up a shared Google Doc and we can start collaborating there.
Yeah, that sounds
good. Sounds good.
Yeah, with the idea that we'll go into the Kubernetes tasks page, and the page will be, oh, thanks, Laura. That would be great. And yeah, I think that let's say that the place that we would want to put it would be, well, my initial thought is we put it under tasks / like setting up a multi-tenant cluster or something like that. But there's a lot of stuff in those tasks, and so I want to find some way to make sure that it's more as discoverable as possible as well. So you can spend a little bit of time figuring out where to put it to.
Yeah, I don't know if that task has been maintained, because some of the documents I realized on 1.10, so it's about how many years ago. That's I don't want to give an impression that this is all the deprecated docs.
Yeah, like the namespaces walkthrough was only recently updated so that it's no longer pointing to the design docs for namespaces, which is like a 2014 or 2015 decision.
Yeah, I think if we want to keep it high level, I would suggest putting it under concepts, right? And just
Under concepts.
so that way we
Yeah,
don't
that's a
have
good
to.
Yeah, that's been the idea if you can really do that.
Containers, workloads. Yeah, we could put it as a top level one called multi-tenancy. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll get away with that, but we can try.
Just takes a PR.
And if you get pushback, you could probably throw it under the extending Kubernetes section as well.
Extending Kubernetes, yeah.
Which is under concepts. Which is probably like the next tier down if you got pushback for trying to find a place for it.
Are you saying we're not worth top tier, Chris?
I mean, I think we are, but you know, people might still complain, like, should you really do multi-tenancy? Come on now. And we have to go into those arguments.
Yeah.
Those arguments.
Cluster administration is another place different. Anyway, that's that. I'm not going to try to boil that ocean today. But.
Okay, so I think
okay. So why don't we
start the outline, and then should we have a discussion with SIG security docs or SIGOT?
I mean, I think it's up to you, Jim. Like if it was me, what I would do is sort of sketch out an outline of what we want to do and then just circulate it with them. But you know.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's start with the outline, and then we can certainly share on the right Slack channels and look for feedback. And if there's enough interest, or if other folks want to participate, we can invite them to join in.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And I think getting those eyes on whatever docs we have as reviewers will definitely be awesome. And if anybody has the cycles to contribute, that would be super cool too.
Adrian, you're on mute if you're talking.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, everybody else's video has disappeared for me. Laura, can you just add your email address to the doc, unless somebody else knows how to get in touch with her?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. Just because you kindly offered, but I think the chat will be lost as soon as we close this window.
Gotcha. Yeah, totally.
Or join,
okay,
join the Slack channel is also good.
Oh yeah, good point. So maybe Jim, you'll coordinate, and the rest of us will pitch in.
Okay. Do you want me to? Were you going to start the Google Doc, or do you want me to? Or
I was going to start a doc for actually writing the documentation, but if you wanted to, but I was thinking more about like the proposal of what we're going to do, which we, as Tasha is saying, then want to circulate to the different SIGs.
I see. Okay.
Do you want to take the lead on that, and I can take the lead on writing the docs?
Sure. Sounds good.
Sweet. I feel like we should sign up Tasha to do something just for old time's sake.
I'll help.
Yeah, Tasha will make sure the documents show up in Kubernetes page.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, well, great meeting everybody. Lovely to see everyone's faces after such a long time. And
I
yeah,
know.
maybe I'll make a pull request and try to change this to once a month instead of every 2 weeks. But dealing with the community repo is one of my least favorite activities, so it might take me a little while.
Good
Yeah, I
luck.
think
No worries.
I think for next meeting, Charles, can you make a presentation? I think we can just set up now if you want.
Yeah, sure. That would be great. So that would be 2 weeks from now or 1 month, because
Yeah.
I remember 2 weeks. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Cool.
I'll be off. I'll be off by then, so I won't be attending the next meeting. So if you wanted to push it to like mid-January, people might be going on vacation in mid-December, like me. So might not
Canadians
be
with all your PTO.
Wait, they let you leave work?
only to go for our free healthcare.
Wow, that hurt.
Sorry, that was a bit too real. Sounds
Cool.
good. Yeah, so,
Yeah.
so maybe mid-January would be a good time to reconvene.
Okay, I'll look at the dates and suggest something to Chow. Chow, are you in the Slack channel?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
do
I will
you,
double check.
Do you have our agenda doc in front of you?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I have.
Okay, cool. I'll look at the calendar and just add the next date for our most likely meeting, and then you can just add your agenda item to that. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds great. Sounds great.
Okay,
Mhm.
cool.
Okay.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.